Howdy there, youngins. Silver Mongoose here, back again for another episode of Gaming Favorites, where me and some guests sit down and we talk about something that we love in video games, whether it's a specific genre, a type of game, one specific game, a system, just something that we love. And today I have two guests that we're going to be talking about game difficulty. And the two guests that I have are very appropriate. The first one is Derrick, the Completionist. How are you doing today?
Doing good, my friend.
And then the other one is Dinky Dana. And both of these guys are pretty well known, I think, at this point for loving difficult games. And I think maybe I'll just start with talking to you, Derrick, and why do you like difficult games?
I think the reason why, I prefer difficult games, I don't think it's anything I deliberately look for. It's almost something, you come across accidentally. But I think, for as much as all of us love gaming as a hobby, in a way, because obviously, the main ambition, I guess, of any gamer when we play a video game is to actually, beat a game that we actually want to play. Because in a way, we don't feel that our game playing is considered some kind of small accomplishment, unless we actually beat it. And I think more than anything, I think you feel more fulfilled and more proud of yourself, especially if you actually go about beating a game that's considered difficult. Because if a game is considered too easy and you beat it on your first playthrough or anything along those lines, and you don't really have much problems with it, like you don't have that same sense of fulfillment. You don't feel like that your skill as a gamer has been tested. Because in a small way, when playing a video game, it's not as if you're trying to find a right terminology, like prove something to everybody. It's more that you want to prove your skill set to yourself, especially if you've been playing video games and you want to feel challenged in a way. You don't want things to be sure. Can things be frustrating? But I think as a gamer, it gives you a greater sense of fulfillment. Especially if you can beat a difficult game, especially on your own.
Yeah, and for those that don't know, Derrick here, who has a channel on YouTube, he likes to 100%, or is that a rule? You just 100% every game you've played, or
Yeah, that's pretty much a rule. I 100% any game that I play, regardless of difficulty or like anything along those lines. But I think the biggest thing to consider, Mongoose, is I actively don't try to find games that are difficult. It kind of comes across to me accidentally. Like the only time I'll ever set a game to like a very high difficulty level is if it ends up, unlocking something. If I end up getting a different ending, if I end up getting a different character. For the majority of the games that I do play, I'll usually play the game on normal mode, and especially for a lot of NES and SNES games, or like even games in the 8 to 16-bit generation, normal mode for like some of these games can still be quite a challenge. And if I can complete and beat the game on normal mode, or beating it on a higher difficulty, then I'm not going to do it, because it really doesn't offer anything extra. You can probably feel more proud of yourself for obviously doing a game on a higher difficulty. But I guess in my eyes, if it doesn't unlock anything, if it doesn't give me anything new, then I don't really see the purpose.
So the other guest that I have here, Dinky Dana, and not only does he like to play difficult games, but I just actually thought of this now as I was listening to Derrick speak on how at some point, I don't know if you still hold this, but you held like the world record for some old games before, didn't you?
Yeah, I actually got a world record for Contra. Yeah, I got that, and that's definitely a difficult game.
Yeah, I think I mean, I never played Contra as a kid. I only played it as an adult a few times, and it was like I was lucky to get to the second level. It was just brutal, and never with just one person, right? You need that other person to help you out. So what is the actual record for that?
Well, to get the record, and to explain it even before that, is I just played the crap out of that game when I was younger. Playing the old NES games. I started with Atari and Nintendo. and I just played it a ton with my brother. And I actually watched the movie King of Kong. And if you guys haven't seen this movie, I think you guys probably already saw it, but anybody who's listening, if you haven't seen the movie King of Kong, it's a really good documentary about the world record for Donkey Kong and what the competition was for it and what the guys went through. And it's a really good movie. And what happened was I watched that movie and I heard about the site called Twin Galaxies, and they were in charge of all the world records by Guinness. The Guinness Book of World Records, gave them permission to keep track of all the world records for video games. And I went on and I looked and I was thinking, what older games could I play? Games that I really liked. I like Zelda, Punch Out, Mario Brothers, things like that. And I saw Contra, and what you had to do to get the record is you had to get so many points, and the Nintendo could only hold so many digits for score. So once you played long enough, and you would have to beat the game the first time, and then the points would carry over. So you ended up having to beat the game 9 times in a row with no continues, and you can't use the Konami code. And I remember I lived with my mom at the time, and I was like, I told her I was gonna go and try and get the world record, and she just laughed. She was like, yeah, whatever. And I went upstairs and I started playing, and the first time I played through, I realized that the first time I beat it, I didn't die at all, and you accumulate extra lives. And then I was like, oh, this is going to be easy. By the time I finished the first one, I had like 8 lives. And then the second time I finished the playthrough, I'd have like 14 or whatever. But then I didn't realize that not only does the game increase the amount of enemies on the screen, but it also stops giving you extra lives. So by the 4th playthrough, I thought it was going to be easy, and then it started getting super hard. So I got wrecked at the end. And then the second playthrough, actually, I got the record, so it only took 2 times. But I don't know, that's one of those things with those older games. When I grew up with the Nintendo, it was like you had one game to play. So you played the crap out of that game until your parents bought you a new one. And that's just one of the games that's stuck in my head, and I remember everything about it. So yeah, that was definitely cool getting that record. And then actually I just went out to a pinball convention here in Pittsburgh called Replay FX. It's the world championship for pinball, and I got to meet Walter Day was out there, the guy who started Twin Galaxies. And then I also got to meet not meet him, they were playing Donkey Kong, but Billy Mitchell and Steve Wiebe, who were the 2 main stars in that King of Kong movie, and they had the world records. Got to run into them, so it was pretty cool down there.
That's cool. So is difficult games like something that you've always been attracted to then? Like Derrick just, as he explained it, for the most part, it's to test your skill and to kind of feel accomplished and to prove something to yourself. But for you, like, why is it that you are attracted to difficult games?
Yeah, honestly, I would kind of agree with Derrick on how he said that, I don't really specifically look for difficult games. It's kind of, you stumble on them. And if you're playing a game, there are different game types of difficulty. So the things that I prefer most are when you're playing through, there are certain games where they have challenges that are super difficult, but they're kind of difficult just to be difficult. And the things that I prefer are games where you don't even realize that you're putting in so much time into completing them because they're actually fun to do. Like Super Meat Boy was a game like that. It got so hard toward the end of the game, but it was just so much fun, and you never felt like you were getting frustrated with the game. If you died, it was because of your own mistake or something like that. So that's the kind of difficulty I look for, where you don't even realize that it's hard. You just really want to beat it. And then when you finally do, you realize that you put in like 4 hours into a level and you finally accomplished it, Yeah,
you kind of zone out and you're just like, I gotta keep going. And the sun is rising in the morning and realize you've been playing all night. Yeah, I think that that's certainly a different kind of difficulty. I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Derrick, but I feel like the way I view the games that you complete as difficult is more specific time investment, I think, because, you generally you play a lot of RPGs, and RPGs for me has a difficulty that I don't necessarily enjoy, because I find that a lot of RPGs, most of them, I'd say a good 95% of RPGs I've played, their ideas of difficulty is put more time into it, right? Like, just grind. And me killing slimes for like 3 hours is not difficult. It's difficult in the sense that I have to invest that amount of time, but I'd rather be challenged like something like Super Meat Boy that has to do with like reflexes or something, right? Whereas there are good ways to make RPGs difficult, like putting the onus on the player to battle more, consciously than just pressing A and just like mashing. But I find for the most part, RPGs just kind of waste my time under the guise of being difficult. And RPGs that people think are easy are like, oh, that's only a 40-hour RPG. Like, that's so easy, whereas they look for like Dragoon or something, or Dragon Warrior 7 or whatever. It's like a 100-hour game. And I can't get behind that quote unquote difficulty myself. I don't know if you have a thought on that.
You bring up a really good point because, like, for me, it's really hard, even though, the amount of RPGs I have played is very limited compared to everybody else. But, you're right, because, difficulty can be measured in a lot of things. It could be measured with regards to boss fights, with regards to dungeons, or anything like that. But I think, especially for the turn-based, like, difficulty can be measured, in the sense that, a lot of these turn-based RPGs, it does require a lot of grinding. So it's difficulty in the sense of a game being monotonous, that you have to, have a good amount of patience, to allow yourself to grind for like hours, especially, if you end up going to a dungeon in which you're completely under-leveled, but unfortunately some games have been designed in which they deliberately do it so that they can milk more time out of you playing the game, so you kind of feel like, you're kind of getting your money's worth. Unfortunately, it's a cheap tactic, but unfortunately a lot of are guilty of it. But the thing is that one of the biggest drawbacks, I find with the turn-based RPGs is that I always find that for a lot of them, for the majority of them, you're not really challenged, especially by the time, you get to a boss, because you spend so much time trying to level up, trying to make sure, you have enough gold, to buy the best weapons, or to max out all your skills. By the time you get to the final boss, he or she ends up being a complete joke. I find with regards to difficulty of gameplay, I think it's more common in RPGs and JRPGs in a more action style environment, because like I like watching YouTube videos based on difficult RPG boss fights, and some of the most common fights that make the list that are incredibly difficult are from more action based.
Right.
JRPGs compared to compared to turn-based. There are definitely exceptions. I know in the Final Fantasy X international version, and that's a turn-based RPG. Like the Dark Aeons are as hard as hell. But then usually when a lot of people talk about hard RPG boss fights, a lot of people will usually bring up fights, from the Kingdom Hearts series and the Star Ocean series. I constantly hear stories about, the final boss of Star Ocean 2, known as Indalecio, spoilers, or Gabriel, as he's known in the PSP version. If you fight him with his limiter off, he's the most difficult boss fights in, JRPG history. And the thing is that that's in a sense, of getting to a final part of the game, and you actually fight a boss that will actually cause you frustration, and it's not going to be a cakewalk, no matter how far you level. And from the stories I've heard, it's something I haven't attempted myself. But in Star Ocean 2, you can level up your characters to level 255.
Jeez.
But it's still not enough. Maxing out all your characters. With regards to power leveling, it's still not enough to beat the final to beat the final boss. You need to make sure you have the right characters, the right skills. You got to know when to attack them at the right time, and even some parts of the game can actually takes luck.
Hmm.
Like I see more difficult boss fights in JRPGs more in the action style battle systems compared to the turn-based. Now it's not to say that difficult bosses from turn-based RPGs don't exist. They definitely do because another game I can think of. It's something I haven't attempted myself, but I hear some of the secret bosses in Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne and Digital Devil Saga are also some of the most difficult boss fights you'll ever encounter in any kind of RPG. But for the most part, for a lot of turn-based RPGs, you're absolutely right, Mongoose. Like a lot of them, try to disguise maxing out their gameplay with regards to grinding. But if you end up grinding too much, unfortunately, the rest of the game feels like a cakewalk, and in a way, you don't feel challenged.
Yeah, and I think the way to get around that is, like you said, is to make it so that it doesn't really matter how much you level up. The final boss will, whether you beat him or not, will be dependent on your skill, as in, the characters you chose, you have the correct items, you use the spells in the right order, or something like that. Like one boss that I think did a pretty good job of that was, despite the fact that it's well known to not be a terribly difficult RPG, was Chrono Cross, where at the end you can beat the boss one of two ways. Spoiler alert here, is you can just beat it by completely just pounding away at it, or you can beat it staying spells in the correct way, and then that using all the spells in the correct order will just automatically defeat the boss. And that, even though that's still fairly difficult to do. And I know some people that have given up on that boss. And another one that did it fairly well, that was very angry about it at the time, was Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga on GBA. I don't know if either of you guys have played that.
I haven't played it yet.
No. Okay. So the final boss is again, spoilers. Anytime we say final boss, it's just spoilers. We'll just that way we could stop saying it.
Yeah.
But the final boss, for those that don't know, the Mario RPG series is it's turn based, but there's also like action in there, like Dragoon, where you can press a button to defend or jump or something in battle, or press a button to double your attacks or something. And the final boss, I spent all this time beating them, and it's a combination of Bowser and another main character. They morph together to form Bowletta, which is like a half female, half male Bowser witch thing. It's really odd. Anyways, you spend all this time beating the crap out of them, and then you're like, yes, you finally beat them. And then the boss just eats you. And then you're inside its stomach, and no matter how well you were doing, you are pushed both to level to 1 health, and then it uses several attacks that you have to dodge in a row. And if you miss one of them, you have to dodge with Mario and Luigi, both, so 2 different buttons. And if you miss with one of them, then the other brother has to carry them, which makes your jumps harder. And then if you get hit again, then it's game over, and you have to start over again at the first boss. Now, on the one hand, that really pissed me off as a kid, and I actually never beat that boss. But on the other hand, I think that that's a really good way to make that boss difficult, because it sets the bar back to 0 in the middle of it. So it doesn't matter how leveled up you are, you're starting at the bottom. I don't know if that makes any sense. That was kind of a long ramble.
Oh no, it absolutely does. The thing is that the biggest gripe that I have, with a lot of the JRPGs that I do play is that, it's always disappointing that, you're on this grand adventure and you're really enjoying this game. And in a way, you want to be challenged at the very end. This is the final boss. This should be the hardest part of the game. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. This should basically, test your limit, and basically you're at the final boss. You went through all this personal strife, personal challenges, and you're getting ready to fight the final boss, and you should be challenged. But nothing's more frustrating than getting to the final boss and end up finding out that the final boss is such a wimp, and it's just a couple of strikes, and that's it. And he's dead. And I think a perfect example of that, let's look at one of the most famous final boss fights of all time, especially in JRPG history, and that's Sephiroth. You spend this entire game knowing who your enemy is, and you know that's eventually the guy you're going to fight at the very end. And you go into it expecting this like really, really difficult boss battle.
Mm-hmm.
And I hate to break it to people, but like he's not hard. It's pretty frustrating that like the weapons, the ruby weapon and the sapphire weapon, end up being much harder than the actual final boss. And it's even more frustrating, when Sephiroth's final attack, the supernova, it doesn't even technically, if you're at full health, it doesn't technically kill you. It knocks about 90% of your health. But but like with final bosses, you need to take all the precautions. You need to like cast like physical defense and spell defense on yourself. Like when you go into a final boss fight, you should expect that any attack the final boss gives you is going to kill you in one shot.
Well, I don't know if I'd go that far.
Well,
oh man, Silver Mongoose would never beat any of the games.
Yeah,
never.
And honestly, I mean, I think it kind of has to do a little bit with like a personality type thing, how people play games with especially with the RPGs, because for me personally, I almost have to stop myself, kind of like Derrick's saying, I almost have to stop myself from leveling because it gets really addictive for me. So every area I go through in like Final Fantasies, I always find an area to stop, and I just like grinding levels, and that a lot of the time causes me to be super overpowered by the end of a game, and then you beat the final boss, and it's kind of a letdown. And one game that I think did a really cool job with it, and I actually did it by accident. I was super leveled up in Final Fantasy VIII, and when you get to the end of Final Fantasy VIII, you go through this mansion, and you have to go through the mansion, and the more you explore, you beat bosses, and then you can get your abilities back. And I didn't realize what was going on, so I went through, and I only got 2 abilities back. I think I got items and magic, and I went to fight the boss, and it was one of the most exciting bosses that I can remember ever playing. And the only reason that is because I didn't have all of my abilities, and it was kind of a cool way to kind of neutralize that so that you could still have a challenge even if you leveled up your characters completely. But I don't know, I think it's kind of a personality thing, because I really enjoy grinding levels, and I kind of do it by accident.
Yeah, it's just carrying on from Dinky's conversation. Like one of the worst things that happens to me, especially when I grind in the JRPGs, it happens unexpectedly, because like the JRPG I'm trying to complete is Breath of Fire 3. And one of the key aspects of completing that game is that one of the things you have to collect in that game is enemy skills. And when the menu comes up, for you to attack or defend or cast spells, you also have another option to choose a skill called Examine. And what it does is that when you select the skill Examine, and you have to wait for the enemy to perform that specific attack. And if the character decides to learn it, it's not guaranteed to happen every time you hit the Examine command. But if the character learns it, a little exclamation point will appear over the character's head. But it's not guaranteed to work all the time. And unfortunately, at the very beginning of the game, there's like 5 or 6 enemy skills you can get. But there's no guarantee that you're going to get them every time because not only do you have to press the Examine command, you also have to hope that the enemy will actually pass that command. And then there's a small percentage that you might learn it. And if you don't learn it, then you have to keep walking around again until the same enemy comes up, and you still have to learn try to learn that skill again. And then when I looked at the game clock, I realized that at the very beginning of the game, I just wasted 2 to 2.5 hours just trying to gain all these enemy skills, because unfortunately there are some enemies you can only get these skills at the very beginning of the game, and then you won't be able to get them for the rest of the game. And so that's what I ended up doing. It wasn't necessarily something I had to do, but as a completionist, you have to give every item, every treasure chest, every weapon, and for me, the key completionist aspect of that game is to get every enemy skill, and I ended up accidentally, grinded for a couple of hours just to make sure I could get these skills before I could move on to the next section of the game. It wasn't necessary for most gamers, but it would be necessary for me. But it just kind of came across accidentally. But then, as a result of doing that, the first part of the game was a little bit easy because obviously I was power leveled a bit. But thankfully, things started to balance out a bit, and I got to a good level in which normal enemies and normal bosses started to be.
It's funny.
Man, honestly, I have to just say right now, for people that are listening, you kind of have to you have to go check out the Completionist video. I'm sure we'll have a link or something, but I don't know how you do that stuff, because I like getting everything in games, but I have never seen anybody to the level of Derrick in completing games. It's unreal. Like, it's awesome that you do it. Oh my gosh, I would go crazy. I would definitely go crazy.
Yeah, I've actually, well, I almost gone crazy trying to complete stuff before. As a kid, like you said, Dinky, you have, your parents, like when we got our NES, I think we had like 10 games, and that's like all we had for like 3 or 4 years, right? So I got very familiar with those games. So that puts me in the mentality of, all right, you get a game, you squeeze every little bit out of it. And then I remember the point in games where I stopped trying to complete them 100% was when I got Time Splitters 2. And I don't know if you guys have played the Time Splitter series. Right?
No, they were awesome. They were so much fun co-op.
Yeah, and there's like 100 and some characters to unlock. There's the challenges in there are just so insane. I think I had like 24% in that game, and I worked on it for years. And I remember at one point there was a mission where it was just, survive, beat all the enemies, and all the enemies were that stupid little guy that was half beetle, half man. And there was tons of them everywhere, and they just kept murdering me. And I tried it for like an entire day, and I remember like feeling so frustrated, like my neck I could feel the tendons tightening, and my face was hot. I just put down the controller, I slowly walked outside, and I grabbed the machete. I just started hacking away at this log I had in the backyard until I felt better, and then went back in, and I was like, you know what? I think I'm done with this game.
And that's the day Silver Mongoose changed.
I mean, I don't generally like rage quit games, but that was one of them because there's so much to unlock in it. And another one was Echo the Dolphin, which is a different kind of difficulty because for those that don't know, Echo, it was a Genesis game. And you play a dolphin, and I guess I call it like a puzzle game, like an adventure puzzle game. And you're a dolphin, and you go around and solve puzzles and try to advance to the next level. It sounds pretty easy, but they give you no indication of what to do. And sometimes when you have to do something, it's so specific. And I remember playing that, and my girlfriend at the time was watching me, and she was laughing every time that I screwed something up. And I just got to the point where I was just like, F this game, I'm so done with it. And she just, every time I got angry, she got happier. And she just kept laughing, and she was getting amused by me getting frustrated, which I understand. And it's kind of funny sometimes. And I look back at it now, and it was really funny. But that was a game where I was like, I'm done. I'm done with Echo. Screw Echo. He can go drown in the ocean. I'm done. All his little friends can just go die. Sick of Echo the Dolphin.
I would absolutely love to see the Completionist raging. See, you were talking about rage quitting games. I'm very curious. We may have talked about it in the past, but I don't know if you've ever rage quit a game.
Oh, I have.
Yeah, let's hear a story from one of those.
Okay. It's kind of funny because one of the games I did complete, and the rage quit actually happened on a group Skype call with a couple of other YouTubers.
Oh, so there's possibly evidence of this floating around, is what you're saying.
Well, unless somebody recorded it, but it was a large group of people. There was like 8 people on the call, and like usually, on Skype calls that large, sometimes conversations different to different things, and then I'll usually be playing a game in the background, while listening. I don't really have anything to contribute to the subject. So the game I was in I was trying to complete was Donkey Kong Country 2. For the Super Nintendo. Obviously known as probably the best game in the series, probably has one of the best SNES soundtracks for that entire system. And basically I had the majority of the game completed. I already had beaten technically the final boss, but then there was a secret boss, and I was trying to eventually do that. So I got to the secret area in the game, and this secret area probably has some of the most difficult levels in the game. And eventually, with enough practice, I got through the majority of them. Probably wasted no more than maybe 5 to 10 lives, maybe on each level. But it was just a matter of just learning the pattern and things along those lines. But then the last secret level that I had to beat before I fought the secret boss was a level called Animal Ants. And that level gives me nightmare. That level made me quit. That level made me rage quit so bad, I was literally slamming the SNES controller on my knee, just basically pounding it so bad, because the problem with Animal Antics is that you don't play the level as Diddy or Dixie Kong. You play the level. There's 4 to 5 sections of the level, and in each section of the level, you play as one of your animal friends. And for the most part, the level was fine until I got to the parrot section of the level.
Oh yeah, Squawk's got some frustrating stuff.
Right, because the worst thing about that level is in the Squawks section of that stage, you're put into the thorn forest, and in the thorn forest, all the walls, the floor, and the ceiling, it's all spikes. It can all kill you, and you have bees everywhere. And some of the bees, are the yellow ones, and you can technically kill them, because Squawks throws nuts at the enemy. Mm-hmm. And but the red ones you can't kill. And that's not even the worst part of the level. The worst part of the level is that you have the wind blowing you back and forth, and it constantly changes. Now it changes in a pattern, but if you end up going in one direction and the wind is blowing in that same direction, it makes you go really fast. And when you're trying to go in one direction and the wind is pushing you in the other direction, you move a bit slower. But the moment that you take yourself even off guard just for a second, the wind will just take and push you right into a bumblebee or into the spiked ceiling or the spiked wall. And it's just, some of the maneuverability in that game was nuts. It was one of the most difficult platforming levels I've ever played for the SNES. And I think what really frustrated me the most was, by the time I got to that level, I had racked up maybe about 55 lives. Mm-hmm. And I used all 55 lives, and I still couldn't beat it.
He used all the lives and the controller. They all were lost.
The lives were a loss. Thankfully, the controller's pretty durable. I've never had a controller throwing moment, but because obviously, I don't want to throw controllers because they cost money, and so I was just kind of slamming it into my leg. Because I was just getting so frustrated with it because I kept getting killed at the same spot. Yeah. And there was one time, I remember I had about maybe 8 or 9 lives left, and I actually passed the Squawk section of the stage. And then the last section of the stage is that you play as the snake. And basically, I was right at the very end, and I could see the ending part of the level. And I took a huge jump with the snake, but I took the jump too much at an angle, and instead of getting on top of the bee or something, I actually hit the bee side on and died. And
that would If you could, that's like seeing the end of the tunnel and seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, and then you die. Especially with a specific part that you finally pass. That's the worst.
Yeah. And and I think ultimately that's what frustrated me the most. And the worst thing of all is that I didn't make a. Thankfully, the game does have unlimited continues, but when you continue in that game, you don't get your 50 lives back.
Yeah, that's true.
And you only get maybe, I think, 3 to 4 lives. So, I was quite persistent. But after I lost the 50 lives, I just had to put the controller down. I kind of had to walk away. And I tried a few more times, 4 lives, died, had to continue again. And eventually I beat it. And it's definitely one of the most difficult platforming levels I've ever had to play out of any SNES game I've ever played. But I wouldn't necessarily call the level unfair. It's just you just had to learn it, and and eventually it took a lot of frustration. It took a lot of time, but I beat it, and then I made it to the secret boss, and after a couple more tries, I beat that too. And like I said, one of my rules, for playing games, is like once I have a game completed. I never have to, I feel I never have to play it again because I got as much of a good experience out of that game as possible. There's no reason for me to go back to it. So at the end of the day, I'm glad I beat the level. It was definitely one of my more frustrating video game moments, but it's done. Game is retired, and excellent.
Straight out the window. Never again.
Never again.
Right out of the car window, right? Screw you, Donkey Kong.
That's a game series that I think does difficulty really well. Like, I'm not good at them, and I don't like them all. Like, I'm not a big fan of 2, and I don't like 3 like outright. I like 1, and I love the ones on Wii and Wii U. And part of the reason is because they kept like the same level of difficulty. And I could never beat those by myself. I'm always playing with someone else, like my brother, who's much more skilled, or Turquoise. She's actually really good at those games too. So I'm always like Donkey, and they always play the good characters. And that's a series where if I die, I feel like, yeah, it's my fault. I just suck at these games. It doesn't seem unfair, like you said, Derrick. And that's a series that it's continued to keep that level. Like the Wii U one is still really difficult. Maybe it's not as difficult as like Donkey Kong Country 2, but it's up there, especially with the secret levels you can get and stuff like that.
Yeah, I played the old ones when they first came out and stuff, and I didn't play the new ones until just recently. I streamed both of them. And you're right. They keep the same exact feel as the Super Nintendo, the music. Everything feels the same. The difficulty, it's probably not quite as difficult, but they are still really challenging games. I've talked to a lot of people that haven't even finished them, but yeah. I mean, they're really good, and some of the best. Like if somebody doesn't have a Super Nintendo and is wondering like what the older games feel like, play the new Donkey Kongs because they do. They feel just like the old ones. They're really good.
Yeah, and those were, I definitely wouldn't be able to beat those on my own. I mean, that's the good thing about having 2 player is one person will die, and then you're like, just stay still, and you're tapping the button to get the balloon down so they can pop it so you can come back, and you just end up spending like 3 times as many lives as you would usually, but it helps you get farther. And the bosses in the Wii U one are so long.
Oh, yeah, they are. And that reminds me, too, I forgot that you could do that. That always reminds me of in Contra, you could steal lives. If you run out of lives, you could steal them from the other player and join in. And I just remember playing that, and like my brother would be stealing all my lives, and then I'd be out, and we'd both die.
Yeah. There's another game you could do that. In Smash Brothers, in the original one, I think, you could steal lives from your teammates. If you were like in a 3-stock match and you lost all of yours, you could steal one of your friends. They don't have any say in it.
Yeah, and speaking of like rage quitting games, I don't think I've ever actually rage quit a game other than when I was real young. One stands out, and I don't know if you guys ever played it. It's Mylan's Secret Castle for the original Nintendo.
Yep, I played it for 5 minutes.
Oh, I played that game for a long time, and I really tried to beat it. And I looked at where I was supposed to go. Back then, there was no internet. We used like how to beat games, or what was it? How to beat NES games or something. A book,
Yeah.
and I
Oh, the
played
pink
through the
one?
game. Yeah, it was the pink one. They had like a pink
Yeah.
and blue and green, I think.
Mhm.
And from my local supermarket, they had it. So I played the game a ton, and I couldn't get anywhere. I mean, it was like I could get into the 3 doors, and then I couldn't figure out where to go. And then I finally got one of those books, and it gave me a code that you had infinite lives. And I was like, oh, this is gonna be great. I'm gonna be able to beat this game.
Doesn't help.
I still could not get anywhere in the game at all. And then I even looked up like where you were supposed to go eventually, and I could not beat the game. It's one game that I've still never beaten, and I should probably go back and play it now that we have like internet guides and stuff or something. But knowing me, I'd probably want to go back and not even cheat and figure it out on my own. But oh, that game was frustrating.
Yeah, that's mostly the frustration in that is like through puzzles, right? Like you're just random, like Zelda 1 style puzzles that don't make any sense.
Yeah, it's kind of like a side-scrolling platformer thing, and you have to like there are just really cryptic paths that you have to go through, and
Right.
I mean, unless you know where they are or you're checking every single place, which as a kid I didn't, I did to an extent, but not not enough to beat that one.
Yeah, I feel like the difficulty in that game is not really fair. Just kind of like, I mean, a lot of people talk about how Zelda 1 is amazing. It's good in a lot of ways, but I find the difficulty in it is just unfair because there's just stuff that it's either you figure out by doing stuff randomly or your friend told you who had Nintendo Power, right? Like trying to find that one bush to burn, you're like burning every freaking bush in the world to burn that one to get down, and it's so cryptic. Whereas like Zelda 2, which I know a lot of people don't like, but I love, the difficulty in that was the complete opposite. Like Zelda 1 tries to beat you by confusing you, and Zelda 2 tries to beat you by beating you. Like it just beats the crap out of you, you know? And that was one I never
Yeah,
beat, but it was a lot of fun.
yeah, and I mean, I've talked with Derrick about it, but Zelda 1 is my favorite game of all time, and Zelda 2 is my second favorite. And I'm curious when you actually played Zelda for the first time, like the original Zelda.
I played Zelda 1 much later. The order that I played them was Zelda 2, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, um, Link to the Past, and then Zelda 1. And Link's Awakening was somewhere in there. So I think as
Yeah.
a kid, though, I would have liked it even less.
Well, see, because I wonder, because I mean, when I was young, I played that right when it came out, and like I said, you didn't have any other games. So part of the reason why that game will always stick with me, and it's my favorite game ever, is when I was young, I just remember playing it, and that exploration and trying to figure out all those cryptic secrets and stuff like that's what was fun back then, because I didn't have any other games, and that kept me going, and it was like an achievement when you finished it. Where like if I played a game like that now, I can already tell I'd be on GameFAQs looking up when I get stuck or something like that. But back then it was like that exploring was what was fun about it, especially as a little kid, you never know what's around the corner. And the map was really big back then, so but I don't know. It's one of those things I think if you played it when it first came out, it's a lot better than if you played it later.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. I think an example of this might be Metroid, which for me, the difficulty in Metroid, I mean, part of it is really cryptic, random stuff, which I was okay with. I liked that, like how you liked Zelda back in the day and the cryptic stuff in there. My problem with Metroid is whenever you die, your health goes back to like 5 health. So you have to spend the first, like, sometimes like 10 minutes, like farming health from enemies, because the only way to get health is to kill enemies, and then hopefully they drop health, and then you pick that up, and hopefully you don't get hit trying to collect more health from the next enemy. And it would take like so much time. And I guess to counteract that, you just never die. But I mean, that's going to happen. It's Metroid. It's a pretty tough game. But maybe back in the day, I would have liked that. I mean, overall, I really liked Metroid. But that was one aspect that felt like really artificial difficulty. You know, it's
Yeah,
okay.
and
Like,
a lot of the Nintendo games back then did that too. Like Zelda, you would start with 3 hearts, so you would go through a whole dungeon. You'd have full health, maybe a fairy, or not fairies in that one. You had a potion, and you would struggle to get through. And then if you died, you had to start the whole dungeon over with 3 hearts and no potions. So it was just kind of like a kick in the balls to you,
I think it was
Like,
more.
here, have fun, start all over again.
I think it was more fair with Zelda 1, though. It was easier to collect health, I think, than in Metroid.
Yeah, and that reminds me, probably the most cryptic thing I've ever seen in games that I've played was in Simon's Quest, when you have to go up against that cliff and you have to crouch for like 10 seconds with the red crystal equipped. Do you guys remember that?
I never played any Castlevania games.
Oh, that's why so many people complain about that game, because you explore the world and it's pretty big, and everybody got stuck there. If you don't look it up, you're going to get stuck. And you basically have to go to this one wall. It's just a wall. It looks like a mountain. And you have to equip a specific item, and then you have to crouch for 10 seconds. And it's the most cryptic thing, and like Angry Video Game Nerd has it in his video and stuff, and it's things like that just happened on the NES back then, you know?
Well, when you look at the whole, but in a way, it doesn't necessarily surprise me that a lot of games kind of went this cryptic route, because you kind of got to understand, the business perspective. It's we'll make games, but we want to make games that gamers may have the possibility to get stuck on, and since there's no internet, if they want to find out how to beat the game, I guess we'll make this book to show them how to beat the game. Yeah. So they'll buy it. That puts more money in our pockets, because basically, like, you got to understand, especially in the NES and the SNES days, that's when Nintendo Power was probably at its biggest. Yeah. And because us as kids, we begged our parents, for the subscription, because we needed it, because that's how we could beat our favorite games, because a lot of the older Nintendo Power issues actually came with maps and hints and codes and everything else. So it was a good business decision on their part, to get money out of gamers' parents at the time.
Yeah, and don't forget that like $10 a minute Nintendo Help hotline or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Yeah, because I mean, back then, everyone that I knew had Nintendo Power. It was just a magazine. Everybody had it. If you played video games, you needed it, and it was just one of those things. So it did make them a lot of money. And I remember you would get it in the mail, and you'd be stuck on a game, and you would flip through, and you would see that it was in the table of contents, and you'd get all excited. You'd flip back, and then you'd find like either codes or maps or guides through it and stuff. And I totally forgot about that. That's a good point.
It's I think one of the reasons why it was a good point that brought up earlier is especially for a lot of us growing up in the 80s and 90s that even existed. The thing is that we had to learn how to play difficult, because for a lot of us it wasn't as if our parents were ever going to buy us a game every time one came out. Like I said, I've used the story that like I said, you were lucky to get 2 video games a year, one for your birthday and one for Christmas. And it's the same thing that you said, Mongoose, that you bought your NES and 10 games, and that's all you had to play. So we eventually taught ourselves that even the bad games, even the games that we didn't like that much, we still kept playing them to slowly get better and better at it. And even though these games get a lot of hate now because some people deemed them as unfair, but at that time when we didn't have anything else to play, or we couldn't rent games at the time, we just literally taught ourselves, yes, I know this is a difficult game, yes, I know this is a bad game, but I've beaten all my other games before, I haven't beaten this one. One way or another, I'm going to beat this one. And 2 games that come to mind, I even find it surprising I even beat as a kid, because they're not the first NES games I would recommend to like anybody, but slowly I just kept playing it more and more. I got to understand the patterns. And the games aren't very good, by any stretch of the imagination. But like I slowly taught myself and trained myself to actually play these games to the point that I actually beat them. And 2 games that come to mind is the original Back to the Future game. Yeah, I actually beat it. Even the stupid, levels at the end where you had to throw milkshakes at the bullies, or block hearts, or just catch musical notes. And it was frustrating. It was difficult, but eventually, after a long time of practicing and playing it, since I didn't have anything to play, I eventually beat it. And another game that isn't necessarily bad, but it is really hard, and that's Iron Sword: Wizards and Warriors 2.
Oh, no, I think that's really hard.
In that game are very floaty, and and the worst thing about that game, from what I know, is I don't think, because if you die, then you go all the way back to the start. I don't think there's any continue option, but I could be wrong. There might be a password. That's from what I remember, and I remember just every time I play it, I used to just get a little tiny bit further each time. But the final boss, you had to marathon fighting 4 bosses at once with limited health, and it was very hard to beat. And it always used to piss me off that progress, and then end up just getting beaten by the final boss. But even after enough tries, I specifically remember it as the last NES game I owned that I needed to beat, because I had beaten everything else. And eventually I just basically sat down, played it once a day. Some days were better than others. Some days I got very far but still couldn't beat it. Others, I couldn't even get past the third stage. But after enough practice, after enough practice and a lot of luck, eventually I beat it, and I felt it. And I don't think a lot of games really do that, because it's not as if games nowadays have limited continues, or a timer, or they'll start you back from the complete start. You have save points at the most convenient of places and things along those lines. But back during that day, especially if you own the game that you didn't beat before, you didn't feel fulfilled until you actually beat that game, regardless if it was a bad game or not.
Well, yes and no. As a side note, Wizards and Warriors 2, great music in that game. I love that game. But like I said, I mean, don't misinterpret what I said earlier when I said you only had 10 games and you milked them. It doesn't mean that I beat them. It just meant that I played them a lot. My copy of Zelda 2 didn't even save. So for 10 years, I'd only seen the first. I only saw the first 2 hours of that game, and I was perfectly okay with that. I don't think I ever beat any games as a kid. I still haven't even beaten Mario 1. I've had that for 20 years now, and there's some games I just saw them as something to pass the time and that I enjoyed, and I enjoyed the moment I was there. And I've beaten some of them since. I've beaten Monster Party, which was somewhat difficult, and I've beaten Mario 2 since then. But as a kid, I never beat any of them. To me, I didn't need that sense of beating it to feel accomplished. I just enjoyed myself in the moment. And then later on, as I got older, there's the occasional game that I wanted to beat 100%. But for the most part, I've still carried that on. And if a game for example, Ikaruga is a really tough game, as a lot of horizontal and vertical shooters are. They're only 5 levels long, and you just keep playing until you have the skill to beat it. I've never beaten it. I think I've gotten to the 3rd level once, but I still enjoy it whenever I play it. I don't need to beat it to get that sense of enjoyment. So I kind of differ in that way.
No, of course.
I was more like Derrick. When I was growing up, I really liked to beat the games, and I would struggle, and I would sit, and even Simon's Quest, I remember sitting and just playing that game nonstop. And I was even one of my best friends still today. I met him back in 2nd grade, and I'll never forget the first reason I ever hung out with him is because he could not beat Super Mario Brothers 3, and he didn't call me. We were in 2nd grade, but he goes after school and he says, "Hey man, I cannot beat this game. Can you come over and beat it for me?" And I was the one who be "Hey, how do you beat this game?" And I would go over and I'd beat it for him, and he just couldn't beat him, and he didn't worry as much about it. But for me, I was I have to figure out how to beat these games. I was more like Derrick in that one.
Yeah, and I mean, a part of that is is, like you said, to make money, and part of it was to stretch out the game because, if the game you can make only has like 6 or 7 levels, it better be hard levels or people are going to beat them in like half an hour or something, right? And then they'll feel gypped out of their like $70 they paid for that game back in the day. And part of it, I think, is also just like a relic of the arcade days where games were designed to take your money and be as difficult as possible. And I find it interesting whenever we were talking about Donkey Kong Country, that reminded me of, I can't remember which game it is. It might be in both of them, like the newer Donkey Kong Country, so they have Super Kong. And how many people were upset about that, I just thought was so ridiculous. Do you guys know about Super Kong?
I don't. Is that like an assistance type of thing where they help you or something?
Yeah, so Nintendo has done this in a few of their games recently. Like some of the Mario games have it as well. The Mario games, like if you die a certain amount of times on a level, they'll give you like a Tanuki tail that makes you like fly infinitely or something. Or in the sense of Donkey Kong Country, if you die a certain amount of times, they'll be like, "Do you want us to just play the level for you?" And then like Super Kong will come and just basically just run through the level, and you have to watch him run through the level. And people were so upset when that came out because, I don't know why. I mean, because first off, you don't have to use it. I mean, for me, that's like the equivalent of like a cheat or like a Game Shark back in the day where you don't have to use it. And the thing is, if you want Donkey Kong Country to be difficult, it still is. Just don't use the Super Kong. And what I like about it is, imagine, Derrick, as if like you were a kid and you couldn't get past that squawk level in Donkey Kong Country 2, but you still wanted to beat the game, and for some reason you could never beat it. You could just get Super Kong to beat that one level, and then you'd be able to beat the rest of the game, and you would feel maybe less accomplished. But to me, that's important to see a game through. And then also, I mean, that would allow kids, what if you're 5 years old and you can't get past a few levels? That would help you get past it. And also that would show you how to beat the level. But it's all optional. So I don't understand why people are upset. Just like how some people, I know Pete Doerr's really bad about this. He's like, "Oh, I hate when a game allows you to change difficulty in the middle because I'm so tempted to just make everything easy when it gets too tough." And I'm like, well, isn't that your problem and not the game's problem?
Yeah, oh yeah, sorry about that, Dink. You go first, and then I'll build on afterwards.
Oh, okay, thanks. With that, I remember when they started kind of doing that stuff. I think it might have even been on the new Mega Man's or something like that. They were talking about that, and even with one of my favorite games of all time, and I've been trying to get Derrick to play it, is Dark Souls. And I heard that people were arguing that make the game a little bit easier and stuff. And I actually think that the option to, like in the Mario, I think that's a good option for Mario because you don't have to do it. And I think that's a good solution because a lot of people that play Dark Souls or something like that, I do not want that game made any easier. It would ruin the experience for me. But I'd say probably 80% of people who play that game do not beat it. And in like Mario and stuff, I'll never use those. Even like you said, if I get super stuck on a level, I still won't use them just because I'm stubborn and I like to beat it all myself. But I could totally see I think that's a good solution rather than making an easy mode for the game or like an entire easy mode. I still think it's a good idea to have the difficulty there. And then if somebody's struggling on one part and they're not as stubborn as I would be or whatever, they could use that. So, I mean, I think it's a good balance for people who actually want to see the ending of a game, let's say, and they can't beat it.
And just to build on from that, Mongoose, I think ultimately, when people make that complaint, unfortunately, you have so many people that are stuck into the old ways of, how games were done because, you always hear, back in my day, this, that, and everything else. But I think the biggest thing, one of the reasons why that, Nintendo does this and more video games do this is that it's, as you said before, the option is there, but you're not forced to actually do it. But I think that they also understand that, especially with the Mario games in particular, no 7, 8, 9-year-old is going to be a platforming mastermind. And the thing is that it can come across, as incredibly frustrating if you have this game and you can't beat it because at the end of the day, I often say, taste is subjective. Different games are going to people, and you probably have a ton of kids that play video games, and they're not worried about completing it or doing everything on their own. They actually want to beat the game, or at least see how the game ends. And I think it's a good thing that some video video game companies offer that option. But it's, as you said before, you're not necessarily required to do it. If you want to play the game vanilla, just how it's simply meant to be played without any help whatsoever, you have the freedom to do that. But if you just get too frustrated and you just want to see how the game ends, then that option is available for you as well. Because, I'll be honest, I did it, and every other kid did it. If we played an NES game that was too difficult, we used stage select codes. We used codes that gave us unlimited lives.
Yeah, you invited Dinky over.
Yeah, and the thing is that if a game was too hard as a kid, we use those codes because we wanted to see how the game ended. Like for right now, one game I recently completed while I've been home is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the arcade game. And it was one of the few NES games that I actually owned as a kid, so I could play it all the time. But as a kid, I did find the game hard because you only had 3 lives and you only had 3 continues. You had a lot of levels to go through, and regardless of how many times I played that game as a kid, I could never beat that game. Plain vanilla, just without any help whatsoever. So I always used the 10 lives code. I always used the stage select code to see how the game ended. But now I'm starting to go back to the classics that I enjoyed as a kid, and now that my taste in games and maybe the skill in a way has improved as well, I decided, I'm going to try to beat this game without any help whatsoever. And after a couple of tries, I managed to do it. And, it was a good accomplishment for me because would it have been something that I probably would have been able to do as a kid? Maybe, maybe not. But I know every time I beat it as a kid, it was never, the plain way of doing it, always with some kind of assistance. And in a way, it was good that they added these options for codes to be used, because it probably made the games a little more appealing, for kids and teenagers to play. But as adults, it's always good to go back to these games and have a better understanding of how these games worked and actually play them and beat how they were meant to be beaten without any help whatsoever.
Yeah, I think that optional kind of difficulty is something that I really prefer nowadays. People, I'm going to go back to Nintendo because people have this perception that all Nintendo games are easy. I could name off a bunch, even on the Wii, that are difficult, like Sin and Punishment and the Donkey Kong game and Punch-Out, and there's quite a few difficult games. But outside of that, they have games like Mario Galaxy or even Kirby's Epic Yarn, where if you want to just see the final boss and just breeze through the levels, go for it. But where the difficulty is you try to get every star in Mario Galaxy, or you try to get every single item in Kirby's Epic Yarn, you are going to be there a while, and it is going to be difficult. And I think that that's a good balance outside of having some sort of assist character or level select or something. I think having those optional kind of completionist side quests or items to collect is a good way to do it nowadays, outside of and also keeping it at a level that you can actually sell to people. A lot of difficulty these days is found in indie games because they cost less money to make and they're shorter, and you can have a niche market. But if you made Mario Galaxy or the next Kirby game as difficult as like Dark Souls, then it would not really sell, right? So I think that that's a good balance and a good way to do it, because it's optional and it allows everybody to play at their own level.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was actually, even just last night, I was streaming Super Mario Galaxy 2, and I've gone through and you beat the game. I think you only need like 70 stars or something, and you could fight Bowser and finish up the game. But I went through and I just got 120 stars, so I'm like halfway there. There's still all the green comet stars. But man, you're right. The beginning levels, they're relatively easy. I mean, you're not even going to get a game over throughout most of the game. And everyone says that the Nintendo games are easy because they only play up till Bowser, but man, some of those later levels that you unlock, I mean, they are really difficult. I mean, they're like levels that I would think that a lot of, like, some people just might never beat them, and it is a good balance because you don't have to play that. That's just an added benefit if you want to go for that difficulty. So that's pretty good.
Yeah, and in terms of difficulty, I had a question for you guys that I thought would be interesting, and that is, have you ever artificially inserted difficulty in a game that wasn't necessarily difficult? Like, have you made the game difficult on yourself by placing restrictions or doing things in a weird way, like choosing the worst characters in an RPG on purpose or something like that?
No. Unless I would only artificially increase the difficulty. It's, as I said before, as a completionist, if it ended up helping me unlock something, or if it actually helped me, get the 100% I need. Because the best example I can give is my favorite game of all time for the Nintendo DS is The World Ends. And in that game, you have an option to increase the difficulty as much or as little as possible. But a lot of times you want to increase the difficulty to its absolute max because it actually increases the drop rate of items for specific enemies. It makes the battles really that much harder, but if you're going for 100% completion for all the pins you can get or all the items you can get, instead of getting, a 0.5% chance of getting that item, when you increase the difficulty all the way up to extreme, then you change your 0.5% drop rate into a 5% drop rate. It makes the battles. Oh, go ahead.
And that game has a lot of items, right? Like, that's heavily item based, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good game. Anybody? Yeah, The World Ends With You. I didn't know it cut off a little bit when you were saying it, but The World Ends With You. That game is really good. Everyone should play it.
And that's a perfect example of a time I will artificially increase the difficulty if it helps me complete the game. It may make it more frustrating, but I won't deliberately do a game through of a game, just to make it more difficult, so people can brag about it. My best friend in real life, he decided to take on the most difficult Final Fantasy challenge for the NES. And as far as I know, I think the most difficult challenge to do on the NES version of Final Fantasy is to beat the game with 4 white mages.
Yeah, my brother's done that.
And he actually did it. And it took him a long time and a lot of work to do it. Now, for me, I wouldn't do something like that because it's not as if I'm going to get a different ending or if the game is going to be a different experience. I'll just take, my normal team and just go through the game. Because I guess for me, like the best accomplishment I could ever get from any game is actually to complete it to 100%, not to necessarily, go for the highest score or go for a Guinness World Record or, or to do just something completely insane in the game, or do a speed run or something along those lines. I know it may be appealing to some people. Who knows? With the amount of games I have completed and the patience and tenaciousness it takes to actually complete this game, I could have a gaming world record and not even realize it. But it's not something I'm interested in. I just like to complete my games to 100% and just retire them for good. But I can understand how it can be appealing to some other players.
Yeah, just quickly on the topic of that Final Fantasy thing, my brother, who's probably going to come up a few more times because he's grown to be one of these liking difficulty games. Like, he'll only play like a few games and he'll just play it over and over, and each time he'll make it more difficult. And that was one thing he did on Final Fantasy 1 and on Final Fantasy Tactics Advance too. He just did all white mages because he's like, so what should I do to make it more difficult? I'm like, all white mages, as a joke. And he's like, okay. And then like a couple days later, he's like, okay, I did it. Like, what next? And I would never do that because I find Final Fantasy 1 like difficult and random enough as it is. And that was a final boss that I was really lucky to beat on the first try, and just was so happy to get that game over with and done. I wasn't a huge fan of it. But back to the question, Dinky, have you ever like artificially increased difficulty?
Yeah. I kind of do that, but only really on like my favorite games. Like Contra's one. I got the world record and stuff, and I was just goofing around, and I like doing no death runs. I'm not really big into the speed running stuff. Like I wouldn't really try for the world record on speed in Contra, just because I mean I don't know, it's a different kind of tediousness that you have to pay attention to on that. But I do really like doing no death, and so I went through and I did with the spread gun, obviously in Contra. That's like that pretty much wrecks everything. Anyone who's going to do it is going to use that. And I go through and I try it with different weapons. So I use like the original pea shooter gun I did a no death run with. And then the one I still have not finished, and it's super hard, is doing it with a laser and no deaths. So I add things in like that. And then also in Dark Souls, like I just love that game so much, and I played it so many times. And then just since I started streaming, I kind of just did it as a challenge for myself to do a no death run. And I finally did it, but it was like, that's probably one of the hardest things that I've ever done. And for me, a no death run is really fun. Like me trying to get the whole game done in 2 hours isn't necessarily as fun. I'd rather take my time and not die at all, because I feel like you learn the game inside and out that way rather than just speeding by everything. But I definitely but it's only for like my favorite games ever, like Zelda's. I try things, and Dark Souls, stuff like that.
Yeah, Dark Souls is well, I'll get to that in a second because I wanted to talk about the artificial difficulty thing. There's been a few times where I've done that, and one has been, again, it's with your favorite games, right? It's games that you play over and over. I would never do that on a first playthrough, but a game like Mario RPG, like every time I play, and I've probably played it through like 3 or 4 times, I choose like different characters and purposely like choose like the worst ones. Same with Chrono Trigger. I'll play like, because they're quote unquote easy RPGs. So I like to choose like the more difficult, just to increase the challenge a little bit, and also just to make it interesting, right? Like every time I play through Chrono Trigger, I could use, Magus and Chrono and Robo, I think, are the best team or something. I could use that every time, but I'll just mix it up to change the characters. And another one that I actually thought of because you've somewhat recently been streaming this is doing Nuzlocke challenges in Pokemon. I don't know if you've heard of that, Dinky, because you just started Pokemon like 20, 25 years later.
I know, I'm way late on that game. I just played my first Pokemon, and I did look into that, and it seems like it'd be really fun, and it doesn't seem like something where it's going to be like a stupid challenge. It seems like that would be something reasonable but difficult, so it definitely... I'll probably look into that sometime in the future, but I'm just going to throw in here, man, they're way better than I was expecting. I mean, I knew I would probably like them, but I don't know. I just finished the first one, and that final boss, like the champion that I just beat. Oh my goodness! I played Pokemon X, and it was a lot of fun. You probably saw my highlight of the champion. You were probably just shaking your head at what a noob I was.
Oh, I'm not very good at it. I'm not good at Pokemon because I just choose the characters I like, and often that's like in Pokemon Gold and Silver, last time I played through, I chose Dunsparce. That's like basically like a worm that lives in a cave and never evolves. And its only thing that's good about it, it has a crap load of health. Like that's it. And it was super difficult. So I don't know about like stats and min-maxing and hidden EVs and all that stuff like other people do. But the Nuzlocke challenge is something that I started to do with Pokemon Red, I think it was. And for those that don't know, the Nuzlocke challenge has different variations, but I think the original one is you can only catch one Pokemon in each area you go into. It can only be your first one. You have to name your Pokemon, and as soon as a Pokemon dies, you release it. And I started doing that with Pokemon, and it was so stressful because every battle is like the final boss battle, because any battle you could lose your starter Pokemon, and I was doing really...
You feel connected to them, I'm sure, with that too, because I mean, one that you've had for a long time, and then it dies, and it's just like it's not like, oh, it's coming back. It's okay, you're released, you know?
Yeah, and I was doing really well. My brother, the one who likes difficulty, beat it super easy, but I was like super stressed with every battle, and then I was doing really well, and I got through Mount Moon, and I'm like, you know what? I'm doing okay. I should go back and fight like those Rockets, Team Rocket people that I was avoiding. So I went back and I found one, and he had like Eradicate, which was like level 16, which at the time was like huge. And Eradicate has an attack, some sort of bite attack that
Hyper Fang.
Yeah, Hyper Fang. So he Hyper Fanged to death every single one of my Pokemon except one. So I only had my starter left, and he only had 2 health by the end of it. And I was like, terrible. No, Fui Fui. My Butterfree's name was Fui Fui. And I was just sitting there. I was like, no, Fui Fui. And he killed my Rattata. He killed everything in one hit except my Bulbasaur. And I was just sitting there, like I left the cave. Like I went in super happy, like, all right, I'm doing well. I'm going to level up my guys. This is going to be awesome. And I left with 2 health. I was just like so defeated. And all I had left on my team was stupid poison Pokemon like Ekans and crap. So I just like, my team is just all poison people now. And it's really stressful, but it's also fun to like put that limitation on yourself with a game like Pokemon. Like Pokemon Red and Blue, I've probably beaten like 5 times in my life, right? Because I got them way back in the day, like when they first came out, and like the Pokemon craze was huge. But that for someone who has gotten bored with Pokemon, I would recommend the Nuzlocke challenge. Look that up, and you will be crying over your dead Pokemon.
Yeah, and for like I've been getting into the streaming and stuff like that is really popular on Twitch and to watch for streaming because it takes the games to a level that normal people wouldn't do. So a lot of the times, I mean, even when I'm watching people on Twitch, I watch people that are better than me and doing harder challenges. And I know a lot of people do that with Pokemon, and it's a lot of fun because, I mean, when something happens, it's a lot more dramatic and it actually has, you know, a serious effect on things. So definitely cool to watch stuff like that.
Yeah, I would definitely watch. I would definitely watch you stream some of that, Dinky. I mean, it's unfortunate. A lot of times whenever you stream, I'm not home, and a lot of the times you stream stuff that I either don't want to watch or I want to play. Like you keep streaming Five Nights at Freddy's, and I'm like, no, I want to play that game. I can't watch Dinky play. And like half the time I'm on there, you're just like Five Nights at Freddy's 2, Five Nights at Freddy's 3, I don't even know what they're up to now, but it seems like you stream that more than anything else. And is that a game series that's difficult?
It's that's what I was gonna plan on probably talking about a little bit because it's a weird series and all of the games came out in a year. August 8th was 1 year after. He came out with 4 games in 1 year. And a lot of people they complain like he's, you know, milking the series for money and stuff, but if you go through, definitely play the games in order. And the first one I would still say is probably my favorite just because the first time you play it, it was unique. But definitely play them in order. And to explain them in difficulty, what people don't realize, and you can't even realize it when you're watching other people play it. You have to play the game yourself, and then you'll get when you're watching it. But they're very strategic games, and at first they don't really appear that way. But they're almost like puzzles in like a strategy game because all of the animatronics, basically what the game is you're stuck in an office and it's very simple gameplay. You can't move your character or anything. You just basically use the things around you like doors and cameras and you have to prevent them from getting to you. And everything about that game is basically like a timed puzzle. And all of the animatronics have their algorithms that say that they're going to attack at a certain time. And most people that play them, they don't even pay attention to any of that stuff. But what's most fun for me is analyzing and figuring out how each of the animatronics work because they all have different behavior. And if you just want to beat the games, it's called Five Nights at Freddy's and you beat the first 5 nights and you get the ending. That's not super difficult. And then you have a night 6, which was like a bonus. And then you have a custom night. And the custom night is where things get super hard. The Five Nights at Freddy's 2, I spent probably a month trying to beat this Golden Freddy mode. And at the time when I beat it, only 2 other people like in the world had beaten it. And I mean, as in that's the people that put it on the internet for people to watch on YouTube. And it was seriously that hard because everybody was trying to beat it and nobody was able to. And I finally beat it, and it's probably one of the most difficult things that I've ever completed in video games. And everybody comes in and they think it's like a kid's game and stuff like that, or like more popular with younger people. But if you really get into it and start analyzing how it works, it's a pretty awesome series, and it's pretty difficult. So I don't know. Definitely play the first one first. You'll definitely like it, I think.
Yeah, I can't even name like the most difficult thing I accomplished in games because it's not a focus for me. So I wish I could, like I had something to brag about, but if anything that I have to brag about, like probably a 10-year-old could brag about the same thing. Like I don't accomplish stuff in video games. Some of them I just never beat, and I'm like, well, I had fun, and now it's over, and well, that's okay. But I don't know, like what's the most difficult thing that you've accomplished, do you think, Derrick?
I think when it comes to difficulty in video games, difficulty doesn't always have to be based around how difficult a level is, or with regards to enemy placement, or anything along those lines. I think one of the most common difficult aspects that a lot of gamers often encounter in the video games that they play is usually the boss fights that we have to go through in order to beat a game. I know from my experience with regards to me completing games, I know some of the most frustrating moments I've ever had to encounter were not only how some of the levels were designed, but some of my most frustrating moments came from the fact of how difficult some of the boss fights that I actually had to defeat in order to consider games fully completed. Out of all the video games, I've ever had the pleasure of completing, there is one boss fight that I had the displeasure of actually fighting. And this boss fight caused me a lot of grief. And out of all the video games I've ever played, this is definitely one of the most difficult boss fights I've ever encountered. And that boss fight comes from a very unlikely game. You wouldn't think this game would have some really hard boss fights, but surprisingly it does. And the game in question is Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep. And the boss fight in this game that gave me so much trouble was the Mysterious Figure. Now, the Mysterious Figure is an optional boss in the game. He is also known as the most difficult boss in the game, but you don't have to defeat him in order to technically beat the game. But if you want to complete the game to 100%, you do need to beat him. And you not only have to beat him with one character, but you have to defeat him with all three of your characters. Because what you get for beating him is you get a specific kind of Keyblade, and you need this Keyblade to finish your Keyblade inventory. If you don't have this Keyblade in your inventory, then the inventory doesn't recognize itself as being completed. So in order to consider the game completed 100%, you do need to beat this boss with all three characters. Now, the game in itself is not a difficult game to play. It's actually fairly easy, to get to the final boss and actually beat the game as it was meant to be beaten. But when you reach the optional bosses in this game, like, the difficulty just spikes up from an insane level, because this boss can kill you in 2 hits. It doesn't matter how power leveled you are, how strong you are. Like, if you are not careful, this boss can kill you in 2 hits, and many of his attacks are incredibly cheap. Once you actually knock this character down to at least past its halfway point with regards to health, the boss actually turns invisible, and that just makes him even that much harder to hit. And he often has combos and hits that if you get stuck and you can't block or you can't avoid it, then he's going to kill you anyway. And I remember playing this game, and I had so much difficulty with this boss fight.
after playing the boss fight for a very long time, you get used to his attack patterns and things along those lines. But he was just an incredibly cheap boss. But I was still incredibly persistent to actually beating him. I don't really have an accurate number, but I must have fought this boss at least 300 times with all the characters in the game combined. And I just couldn't do it. And I got incredibly frustrated with it, but sometimes it takes a little bit of patience and a little bit of persistence to actually beat the boss. There was one time I remember I had to bring my car in to get serviced, and really I had to get the tires changed on the vehicle, and I had brought it to Canadian Tire, and the Canadian Tire automotive unit told me, well, it's going to take a long time. Do you want to ride home? And he said, and basically I had said that no, I don't want to ride home. I'll just sit in the lounge because I have my PSP and I have my charger. And he said, well, it's going to take 4 to 5 hours. Are you sure? And I said, yeah, it's fine. There's a couple of restaurants next by. I'm probably going to be playing the PSP all day. And when I'm hungry, I can always go to one of the restaurants next door. And I was literally at the Canadian Tire dealership for 6 hours. And that entire 6 hours, I kept fighting that mysterious figure over and over and over again. And I kept losing to him every time. And there have come times in which I've gotten really frustrated with that boss fight, and I felt like taking the PSP and throwing it across the room. But I'm not going to get angry at a video game just because I can't beat this boss. The boss is definitely beatable. It's just I'm just not good enough to beat him. But eventually, after a couple of more weeks of trying him, because I always made sure to not try to push myself to the point of frustration again. I used to, every day I used to try to fight him for an hour. And if I couldn't do it, then I just put the game down and then I'll try again for an hour the next day. And then after so much time, I remember I had to fly back to Alberta to work, but I couldn't get back in one day. I actually had to stay in Montreal. And the night I stayed at the hotel room, I finally beat the mysterious figure with Tara, and I was pretty proud of myself. And I managed to beat him, and I was very surprised because Tara can sometimes be a worse character to try to beat him with because he's nowhere near as fast as any of the other characters. And then later on that night, a couple of hours later, I got so used to the mysterious figure's attack pattern, I beat him with the second character in Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep. I think his name is Ventus or something along those lines. But the third character I still kept having problems with, and that was Aqua. And the next morning, I got on the flight going back to Alberta, and I kept playing the game, and after playing against the boss so many times, just before we were ready to land, I finally beat the mysterious figure with the last character. And it was by the time I landed, then I finally had the game fully completed. And therefore I can retire it for good, and I don't look forward to ever fighting that boss ever again, because that boss did indeed cause me a lot of frustration. Because difficulty not only has to come from the game itself or the game's level design, but sometimes the bosses in the game can cause the most emotional and gut-wrenching pain any gamer would ever imagine. And to this day, that has still remained my most difficult boss fight I ever had to encounter. But I haven't played not nearly as many games as what a lot of other people have, so it wouldn't surprise me if there end up being more difficult boss fights that end up causing me more pain and more emotional strife just as much as what the mysterious figure did. With regards to a game challenge,
My favorite Castlevania game is a lot different than everybody else. You talk to a lot of people, and you ask them what their favorite Castlevania game. 9 chances out of 10, it'll be Castlevania Symphony of the Night. And but my favorite Castlevania game is actually Castlevania Order. And the reason why that I love that game so much is because it is probably the most difficult Castlevania game. And this was a time in which I had to make the game difficult to unlock something.
Mm-hmm.
And what I had to do to unlock some stuff in that game is I had to beat the game and get 100%, not 100% getting all the items and weapons and the glyphs, and that wasn't necessary, but I still did it anyway. But you had to beat it in which your level cap was 1. Couldn't gain any levels.
Oh, wonderful.
So, and that unlocked, I think one of the boss rush modes, it unlocked the sound test, stuff like that. But it was a game that no matter how much health you had, you would die in one hit. And in that Castlevania game, there's a lot of projectiles. There's a lot of enemies. There's a lot of, I wouldn't necessarily say cheap deaths, but there's a lot of ways enemies can kill you. And you have to be incredibly careful in every room you go to, knowing that, one hit can actually kill you. And it even made it harder, when you were trying to grab grab all the items and the weapons and stuff like that. But you kind of needed to at the very start of the game if you wanted to have any chance of actually beating it. It was really frustrating. And I remember one boss fight that could kill me in one hit. And I might have lost to him maybe 50, 60 times, but with enough, but with enough practice, I actually managed to do it. But doing that level 1 cap on Castlevania Order of Ecclesia, that's probably been one of the most difficult game experiences I probably ever forced myself to sit down and do.
Yeah, that so it basically just turned the game into like a no-hit run, essentially.
Yeah, pretty much. But
that's too much. That's too much for me.
At least you could save, but even getting to the save points was a challenge. But if you died, at least you could start off at the next save point. But basically, there was no breathing room, because every new room you went into was a threat, and you just had to watch yourself. You just had to step carefully. You just couldn't, run it, as fast as you could, knowing that anytime you would get hit, it would automatically kill you. So just had to go through each room with extreme caution. But it took me a while. It took me a couple of weeks, but with enough practice, I slowly got through it, and I did it. And now the game is completed and retired for good.
I know we briefly touched on this, Dinky, but I'm sure you want to talk about it more. Why do you like Dark Souls?
Oh boy. I could talk about this game for ages, and I have with Derrick. And once he gets his console set up and he can buy it and play it, he is going to love this game. I don't know. Have you played it before?
No, I haven't played it. Oh,
not Derrick. Mongoose, have you played it?
I have. My brother is insane with this game. I think he's put in 1,200 hours or something into Dark Souls. He's pretty into it. And he was almost every day he'll send me a text or a Facebook message or a Skype message, and he'll just be like, all right, so I learned this new thing about Dark Souls, and he'll talk to me about all the lore and stuff, and I'm like, dude, I don't understand what you're talking about. But it seems really interesting, but I just was never, it didn't really seem to appeal to me. It looked really boring and ugly, and I tried it once when a friend came over, and I actually fell asleep playing it because I found it so boring. And
okay.
It was just super gray and slow. But he visited me earlier this year, and he was really ill, almost the whole visit. I think he was here for 2 weeks, and more than half of that he was just on the couch, and he was kind of bummed out because his vacation was being spoiled, and he was like, oh, I don't want to do anything, I don't want to I don't want to watch anything. So I was like, all right, how can I cheer him up? So I went down to the game store and I bought a copy of Dark Souls. And I was like, I'm going to play this. You've been telling me to play it for like 4 years. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to play this game. And I ended up getting, I guess, maybe like 5 or 6 hours in. And he would have probably beaten the game in like, half of that time. But I didn't get very far. But I think I only got as far as I could because he was there, like telling me what to do and where to go. And near the end of like that 5 or 6 hours, I started to appreciate what people liked about it, and I think I liked it. I mean, I haven't gone back to play it since. I want to, but I found it so discouraging, just like being like one-shotted by like so many things. But I think the thing with Dark Souls is it has the same kind of difficulty that like the Monster Hunter series does. And for those that haven't played Monster Hunter, like the difficulty, like you can gain levels and like get equipment and stuff, but that does not matter nearly as much as learning each monster's like behaviors, and your skill, like your personal skill, is what increases. Like you can get better weapons, but if you don't learn exactly how this dragon behaves and how to dodge properly and at the right time and to use the right items when you should be, like you're going to die all the time. And I think that that's kind of similar to Dark Souls, where most of it is you, right?
Yeah, the main reasons that I like the game, well, first I played Demon's Souls, which was the first game in the series, and it came out they had a Japanese copy and an Asian copy, which the Asian was for like Korea and China. That one had English, so I could play it. I imported it like 9 months before it came out over in the United States, because it wasn't originally planned to come out in the US or in the UK or anything, and it was very successful, so they decided to bring it out later, but I didn't know that, so I imported it, and there was no footage on the internet, nothing to help me. It came with a little strategy guide, and I sat down and played that game, and I honestly had never played anything like that before. The game was so difficult, but it's not that most people that play it, they just don't. I mean, it is one of those games where you have to learn, and it's almost, in the beginning, it feels like you just have to play it and find out and predict and memorize and like who's going to attack you, what's going to attack you, how to dodge at the right times. But as you play through the game, it kind of reminds me of the old NES games and the older games of that style, where you play through the game and you slowly learn the game bit by bit. And how they do that is, when you're playing through the game, you collect all your souls by killing enemies. You're essentially like stealing souls from the enemies. And you progress through the level. And if you die, all of those souls stay on your blood stain wherever you died. And you have to start back at the beginning of the level or whichever checkpoint you're in. And you have to get back up to that blood stain, and then you get all of your stuff back. But if you die on the way back there, you lose everything. So it's basically like the souls are your currency, they're your experience to level up and buy things and everything. So it's pretty much you lose all the progress that you just had. And one of the reasons that I love the game so much is that as you play through in the first, usually if people beat the first, like, I'd say it's probably a 60-hour game. If they beat the first 10 hours worth, then it really picks up for them because they understand at least the basics and they can kind of pick it up a lot better. But most people honestly don't last more than like 5 hours. Yeah. Almost all the people that I've talked to haven't even made it past like the fourth boss. But and the other thing too is it's really amazing. I didn't realize it when I first played it, but it's almost like it's a modern day Zelda 2. There are so many similarities. Someone put up an article on the artwork, and even the enemies, the style of the game looks the same. Even going in Zelda 2, you go into areas where you don't have a candle, and it's pitch black. Dark Souls has an area like that. It's a very similar style to those old, like, difficult games that I used to love growing up. So as I play through it, like, it not only does it have some of the best boss fights, they're like, oh man, the bosses are so massive and huge. Kind of reminds me of like Shadow of the Colossus style bosses. And just the difficulty. I mean, as you play through the game, you do truly learn how to play it. And then by the time you get to the end, you don't really die that much per se, but it's still difficult to the end. But yeah, it's one of my favorite games. And I actually had a friend who is very bad at difficult games, like really bad. I always have to beat the bosses for him. And I sent him this as a gift. He lives over in Tokyo, so I sent a whole bunch of games over. And well, yeah, there were some easy games too, but he really wanted to play it, at least to try it out. And I watched him. He streamed it on Skype for me. And I truly thought that he was never going to beat this one boss, Ornstein and Smo. It's like one of the hardest bosses in the whole series. And I actually bought a PlayStation 3 version. I always played it on Xbox 360. I bought a PlayStation version because I thought he would need help co-op, which you could join into people's games. Mm-hmm. So I bought the version, and then he actually beat it on his own, and he ended up making it through the whole game, and he said it was like one of the most exciting things he's ever done. So it's one of those games where if you put the time in and actually finish it, you'll appreciate by the time you're done with it, you know.
Yeah, part of my issue with it is that I find to beat a lot of people, you need to have like a couple tricks like here and there, you know, to figure stuff out. But I don't pick up on that stuff. But you know what? That comparison to Zelda 2, I think, is really interesting and really apt. Like, it's very similar in the sense that you die, and in Zelda 2, you go back to the very beginning of the game, and it doesn't matter if you had 99 out of 100 experience, you're back to 0 experience. And that was so difficult, like near the end of the game of Zelda 2, because getting those last levels were so difficult to grind for. And I guess Dark Souls is really similar to that, and how Zelda 2 near the end has a lot more to do with your skill. I mean, having more health helps, obviously, but it has to do with more of your skill and using all your techniques properly and everything. That's, yeah.
Yeah, and there's one of the levels which I won't go into too much detail because I know, Derek, you better play this game. But there's an area in the game where it seriously just reminds me of Death Mountain when you go down in Zelda 2. And Death Mountain, like as a kid, that was one of the hardest things ever. Because you go through all the caves, it's a big maze, and then when you finally get through there, you have to fight those super hard red axe guys. And a lot of the areas, if you take the time to go through the game and compare some of the styles and everything, I don't think they took ideas necessarily from it, but some of the images when you actually put them up next to each other and even the gameplay, it is like Zelda 2 has a lot of tricks in combat. Like you have the jump and stab as you're dropping down to hit things on their head, and it's just like the move that works, and you have to do that basically to beat the game. Dark Souls has stuff like that, and it has things like invincibility frames, they call them, where basically if you're rolling, you have invincibility frames where the enemy can't hit you, and taking advantage of that, makes a big difference. Stuff like that. And then another thing is parrying. When an enemy attacks you, you can actually parry away its attack. And
so bad at that.
Yeah, once you get it down and you learn it a lot better, you can crush things a lot easier, but it takes a lot of skill to actually do that. It's very difficult to actually get it right all the time. But yeah, I don't know. I try and explain the game as well as possible to people who haven't played it, but it's one of those games that you just have to play. And also, it's got, like you were saying, it's really like a dark game. It doesn't have bright graphics or anything. Everything seems kind of bland and dull. And especially in Demon Souls is a lot darker. Like actually, like blood's on the walls, and it's a very dark game. And then they kind of made it a little bit brighter with Dark Souls. If you talk to all the characters in the lore, there's some really dark stuff. But then once they got the Dark Souls 2, everything's like all bright. It's like the same team didn't actually make that game, and you could definitely tell it's more of in the mainstream. It's more popular because it's easier and it's not as challenging and all that stuff. But the first Demon Souls and Dark Souls, definitely play those. I'd say Dark Souls is probably my favorite.
Yeah, my brother's always on about how Dark Souls 2 is terrible and they ruined it and blah, blah, blah. And I could never understand, but,
Yeah, and actually, it was weird because the guy who made Demon Souls made Dark Souls, and then he didn't work on Dark Souls 2. He stopped he stopped working on that, and he moved over to Bloodborne, which is another game. It's like a spiritual successor. And Dark Souls 2, I think, stinks. And then Bloodborne brought it back. Bloodborne's not as good as Demon Souls or Dark Souls, but it's definitely more along those lines. So, and that game's, if somebody's looking for an easier one to play, they should play that one first, because it'll kind of teach you how to get into it a little bit better, and it's more action and not as much defensive strategy, but definitely play that one first if you don't want to jump right into this super difficult.
Right. Well, we know Derrick's not going to do that. He's gonna go right in the thick of things.
It's it's just unfortunate. It's just my work situation. It's just there are a lot of games I'd love to play. It's just I just simply have the resource to do it. Now I'm hoping now I'm going to be 5 years with this company now next year. So I'm hoping I can actually come home for seasonal work. So I'll be home instead of for a couple of weeks. I'll be home for a couple of months, and then I can start devoting more time to actually. It's with regards to like difficulty in general, it's like the biggest thing I find with myself is especially with certain game series, I often find that the more difficult the game, like the better that I actually enjoy it. It's just kind of funny because sometimes the most difficult games in a specific series turn out to be the games that people like the least. And I guess the perfect example I can give is the Mega Man X series. Now, this may sound really strange, for like anybody that's going to listen to this. But strangely enough, my favorite Mega Man X game is actually one of my favorites in the series, and that's Mega Man X6. And I think and even though Mega Man X6 was a game that was never really supposed to exist, they were supposed to end the series after X5, and I haven't played the PS2 games, X7 and X8. But one of the reasons why, I did love X6 so much is because it was really difficult. So some of the stages were definitely downright unfair, but I actually really enjoyed that. If you talk to a lot of people and ask them what their favorite Mega Man X game is they'll usually say it's Mega Man X1 or 2, sometimes 3, sometimes people will say it's X4. But I've played and I've completed all those games, and some of them have their difficult moments, but none of them were as difficult as what Mega Man X6 was. And even though a lot of people didn't like the Maverick Hunters and how the stage layouts were, and I know the Hammerhead Shark stage was really unfair because it had this giant compressor that could kill you in one hit, and it was something you had to deal with throughout the entire stage. I actually really enjoyed it despite dying all the time. Like the fact that it was so difficult, and in some cases, it got a little unfair. It was something that I actually looked forward to. It's like I said about the Castlevania games. A lot of people love Symphony of the Night, and even though it's a game I still haven't played yet, but I've watched enough gameplay on it because a lot of people do reviews on the game. It looks to be a very awesome game and worthy of the Castlevania game name, but it seems to me that from the gameplay I've watched of it, the game does come across as a little bit on the easy side. And as much as I'll probably enjoy the game when I do play it, I don't think it's going to be anywhere near as difficult as what Order of Ecclesia was. And obviously, as I said before, that was my most one of my both games I actually succumbed myself to. I just like the challenge, regardless if it's intentional or like unintentional. But like difficulty has always been a thing that I've always looked forward to. But especially with my knowledge on games being so limited, because I haven't played a lot of games compared to everybody else, it's always a nice surprise, when you do come across a game that is difficult, and you really. And like I don't like games that you can rush through and it comes across really easy and you can be careless and you're not going to get punished for it. But especially games in the 8 to 16-bit generation, especially when you only had a limited number of continues, if you had a limited number of lives, you actually had to be very cautious about how you were going to progress the level, how you were going to fight this enemy, the whole risk reward aspect. Is it really worth taking the risk of grabbing this item or fighting this enemy, or like are you better off move on to the section of the level. My favorite NES game of all time, is Super Mario Bros. 3, and that's a timeless classic. And I think one of the best things about that game, I think it's a game that, especially any gamer, especially if you have kids, I think it's a game to introduce your kids to. And I still, to this day, consider that game on the difficult side. It has a good transitional difficulty up until Giant Land, but the moment you get into Sky World and then the Ice World, then the game starts to get really difficult. And I still consider, that Air Force level, that Air Squadron level where you're going against all the mini airships to be one of the most difficult levels in Super Mario Bros. 3. I deliberately remember that I never ever liked doing that level on my own. I would always save a P-Wing for that level because at the time, and even to playing the game as an adult, I never really liked progressing through that level unless I had a P-Wing. So
I think the Mario games are they're difficult, but they're manageable for the most part, and they progress well, like slowly enough that even playing through the game for the first time, you probably can get through the second world, even if you just through playing previous Mario games. And I don't think I've ever beaten Mario 3. I've beaten Mario 2 and World, but I think for the most part, those games are just so enjoyable in their difficulty that it's still okay that they're difficult. I think Mario 3 is probably the most difficult of them because they have a lot of flying areas that I'm not very good at. That's 3, right? Or is that World? The Cape.
Oh, the Cape is World. The only way you can fly in Super Mario Bros. 3 is either the leaf, which gives you the raccoon tail, or the Tanuki suit.
Right.
Tanuki.
Right. They were both. I found the flying in both of those was fairly difficult. And the Mega Man ones, I felt like that too for the most part. I thought that they were manageable. My issue with the Mega Man games was from Mega Man 1 to 6, I've beaten every Robot Master, but then I get to like the Wily stages where it's like, okay, now you have to play like 4 levels in a row and not die, or you go back to the very beginning. I've only beaten one of those. It was either 6 or 2. I can't remember which one. But for the most part as a kid, I would just beat each individual Robot Master, get to those levels, and then just play the next game. Because I as a kid, I saw them I could try to beat Mega Man 1. I could try to beat the last 4 levels for 10 hours, or I can play all of Mega Man 2 in that time. So I kind of just weighed the risk and reward of that and just decided I'd rather play a whole new game. So I never beat those as a kid. I beat Mega Man 6 or maybe 2 as well, back when the collections came out, on the GameCube and PS2 and Xbox. But for the most part, I just would avoid that. Avoid finally completing.
Yeah, the Mega Mans, they're pretty difficult. I remember that. And as Derek was saying, the that flying the airship one in Super Mario Bros. 3, that game gave me nightmares when I was a kid. That one would be the ending. You would play through the whole game, you get to that, and I just remember never beating it a lot of the time. And then eventually you'd use a P-Wing or whatever, and you had to skip over it. But the Mega Mans, you're right. Even as an adult, those last 4 levels that you have to get into, they're super hard. And it's almost like when I was a kid, I didn't realize that you had to play Mega Man in order. Each Robot Master's weapon would work better on certain ones. So if you go through in a certain order, you could defeat them easily. And if you try and beat all of them, they have the sections where you have to beat all of them in a row, and you don't know that pattern. Oh man, it's brutal.
Yeah, it's a bit much. It's a bit much for me. One thing I also wanted to touch on was different types of difficulty, because so far we've talked about time investment and skill and reflexes and memorization and putting the difficulty on the player a little bit with Dark Souls or Monster Hunter. But another type of difficulty that I thought of while I was mulling this topic over was the difficulty of a lot of puzzles, I guess, in classic adventure games. I don't know. I doubt you guys have played a lot of classic adventure games, but have you?
With regards to, the PC classic adventure games, not really. I did dabble maybe in the first King's Quest and stuff like that. I guess the whole puzzle aspect, I have played it in games, such as Wild Arms 3 and Xenosaga Episode 2. It has some pretty nasty puzzles. And, sometimes, when you have games that have those puzzle elements into it, like it's kind of a nice change of pace because, you kind of sit down, you can kind of, relax a bit in the sense and, all right, so here's a puzzle, I'm not on any kind of a timer or like anything along those lines. So like, how do I figure this out? And another game that just came to mind is the puzzles that you had to do in the sunken ship on Super Mario RPG. I remember spending a considerable amount of time trying to get those puzzles because even though you only needed to solve I think 4 out of the six puzzles, I actually solved them all because I actually found them that enjoyable. But there are definitely some games. Like, I remember the Millennium Puzzles from Wild Arms 3. The first couple were pretty easy, but some of the later ones were just downright malicious. And it really took a huge time investment to actually kind of figure them out.
The first puzzle game that I thought of when you mentioned that was, you've probably played it, The Adventures of Lolo. Did you guys ever play that game?
Oh, yeah, I played Lolo for the NES.
I'm not sure if I did. I don't think so.
Oh man, you want to talk about a different kind of difficulty. It was so much fun. I don't think I've ever beaten the game though. It basically, you go into the game and you're this little like bubble character. I don't know what he actually is. And you're trying to get to the top of the tower, so you have to defeat, you figure out all these puzzles, and all you do is push blocks around, and you can shoot enemies, and then they turn into little balls, and you can use them as blocks. And it's a really fun puzzle game, but man, it gets super difficult. And by the end, some of the puzzles they're so hard. Like I said, I don't think that I've ever beaten them, but that's probably one of my favorite puzzle games that I've ever played. And then along the lines with more modern games and stuff having puzzles in them, I've really noticed, basically because I'm streaming games now, that a lot of the times it kind of accentuates that, like the delay that puzzles can put into certain games. I've noticed that some games puzzles are appropriate, and I've been playing like Batman Arkham Knight I just played, and the whole game is action. It's a complete action game, and then it'll just go into like a puzzle sequence, and it's just really weird in games like that. And when I'm streaming it completely kills and pulls away all the excitement, which but in other games like Professor Layton's puzzle games are amazing in that, and there are other games that they tie them in well, where you have an area that it leads into like a relevant puzzle. Even in BioShock, you have those, you have to hack the machines. Like stuff like that makes sense because there are little puzzles in there and they seem relevant. But a lot of the games nowadays, it seems like they just put puzzles in there just to kind of delay and make the game like longer so they could say it's a 15-hour game instead of 10. But I don't know. I think I like puzzles, but I don't like them in action games or things like that.
Yeah, they certainly... it's one of those things nowadays that I think developers feel like most games should have something puzzly in there, just to shoehorn it in. But with the classic adventure games, like the whole thing is a freaking puzzle. And I remember it was really interesting when I first played the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy adventure game. And that's like a text adventure game. And I was playing it and I wanted to play it without looking anything up. And I never beat it, but I got fairly far, and it took me probably like 2 months to get to where I was. And it's not like it took me 2 months of being on screen. A lot of the time playing the game was like away from the game, Like I would be stuck at a part, and then I would be at work and be like 4 p.m. at work. They'd be like, "That's how you beat that part. Now I know." And I'd get home and I'd type it up and it'd be like, "Nope, that's not the answer." And I'd be like, "Crap." And then like 2 weeks later, I'd be like, "Oh, this is how you beat it." And I'd go and I'd type that out and be like, "Oh yes, finally." And then I'd move on slightly, get stuck somewhere else. It was like a game that you're playing it even when you're not playing it, which I thought was really interesting. That was like the first time that I experienced something like that because I wasn't looking it up. And the puzzles are like so convoluted and so confusing, but it was really enjoyable still in a different way. And it was like a really different kind of difficulty. And there's other types of puzzles too, like the Resident Evil games, like the original ones, for the most part, is like how well can you manage your items and memorize like where like the layout of the mansion is, like basically like what Resident Evil 1 is, right? It's difficult, but most of the difficulty doesn't come from shooting things. It comes from how well can you manage your bullets and your herbs, right? And I think that's a really interesting aspect of difficulty as well, because that's, for the most part, it's not in any of the newer Resident Evils, and it's not in a lot of games these days. Like, item management, as far as I know, is pretty absent from most games.
Yeah, I would say so. Almost all the games now. There are two things that they've really added in. You'll have infinite ammo, pretty much, or essentially. And then also the other thing is they kind of just put the arrow on the screen that says, "Hey, go here." So you don't really have that exploration type of puzzle anymore, because a lot of them, it used to be, oh, where do you go next? And it was kind of a puzzle of a sequence that you had to go through, and they don't really have that anymore either. But which I can understand, because they don't want people getting stuck, but it also kind of irritates me if they don't do it properly.
Yeah. So in terms of stuff to talk about, I know we only have a few minutes left here, so I was wondering if anybody had anything they wanted to touch on really quickly, or if you wanted to just name off like some games that you think are difficult but still manageable for maybe people to get into. I know we mentioned a few, but maybe we could go over them really quickly. A few games that people might be interested in getting into, or if you have another topic you wanted to quickly go over, that'd be cool too.
I guess I'll go over just real quick, like games that I would kind of suggest for people. I mean, we mostly already talked about them, but I'll just go over them again. The main one is probably Zelda 2, because it's like almost universally known as the black sheep of the Zelda series, and I don't know hardly anybody that's finished the game. And I would definitely recommend for people to just, even if you have to use a guide, go on GameFAQs. I know Jumble Junkie, I don't know if you guys know him from YouTube. He just finally played it, and he was really happy that I told him to play it. And even if you have to use a guide, go through that game, because it's one of the best games, and I think a lot of people really overlook that one. And then also like Super Meat Boy, that's one of my favorite difficult games. Obviously Dark Souls, which we covered, and then the Five Nights at Freddy's. I know Derrick has been pointing out. I've been doing a lot of YouTube videos on that, and streaming it on Twitch, and it's if you want it to be difficult, you can really get into the difficult stages of it. But that's a really, really fun game. And then another one that I played just recently was Geometry Dash, and if you want to throw your controller or keyboard, that game, it's so much fun to play, but I still haven't beaten it. And it's just like, oh, it's crazy. It's a lot of fun.
What kind of game is Geometry Dash?
Geometry Dash, basically all you do is you press the space bar to jump. You're this little block, and you slide across the screen. You can get it on Steam. You slide across the screen, and it has like nice, like, I don't know, catchy music to it. And you just make jumps, and you have to jump over pits and spikes, and it gets like insanely difficult, but it's a lot of fun. Even just,
it's kind of like Hit Trip Runner.
Yeah, kind of like that. And it's one of those games where, I mean, I played it, not even necessarily, someone donated it to me, and I just played it, and it's not a game that I probably have any intention of actually going through and completing all of it, but it's a fun game to just pick up and play a little bit. You can get it on your phones and stuff like that, but it's a pretty fun game. And I know it's I guess not probably regarded as one of the most difficult games out there now. So definitely check that one out. It was a lot of fun.
Cool. I would reiterate the Zelda 2 thing, just because often, like, people I know who hardly know anything about video games, if they know about Zelda, they know that Zelda 2 sucks, right? They're like, oh, it's that one that nobody plays. But it's actually a really good game, and I would recommend that. Also, Super Meat Boy, I think, is a really good one to get into, like you said, because you die and you come back instantly, so you don't have that like same level of frustration. And if you don't want to invest in Super Meat Boy, there's actually a free game. I think it's like just a Flash game. It's called Tower of Heaven, which has some really good music, and it's kind of Super Meat Boy-esque. And if you wanted to see if you'll like Super Meat Boy, test this game out. It's really cool because it's like Game Boy style graphics, has some really cool music. And it tells you like how many times you died. And I think I died like 200 times, and it took me like an hour to beat. It took my brother like 6 minutes to beat. So your amount of gameplay will vary. But if you're interested in Super Meat Boy, I would check that out. And then if you like that, you'll definitely like Super Meat Boy. And I would recommend also getting into one of the Monster Hunter games. I really enjoyed Monster Hunter Tri on Wii, but you can't play online anymore, so maybe get some of the newer ones. But it's a different kind of difficulty. So if you're and you have other people to play online with, so they'll kind of help you out as well. And I don't know if you had any suggestions of some easy entry, difficult games there, Derrick.
With regards, if people are looking for that extra challenge, I kind of wish I could think of more games that, that I haven't previously mentioned. But, if you're looking for like an extra challenge, if it is difficult games, you want to try, RPG-wise, I definitely recommend Star Ocean 2 just because it has two of the most difficult boss fights of all time. If you're looking for that extra challenge, but with a game as big as Star Ocean 2, you do need a guide because there's certain actions, there's certain things that you have to do in the game to make sure you do get to fight the two most difficult bosses. With regards, I would recommend people who love the Mega Man X series, I want people to go into Mega Man X6, with a fresh pair of eyes. I know a lot of people don't like it, but like I do like it for its difficulty. So I'd like to see people try to give that game a second go around. Especially for like a lot of older gamers, especially if you're collecting NES games right now, I highly recommend, going through NES games without any codes or cheats anymore to actually, because, as kids, maybe your hand-eye coordination as a kid was much better. You could probably play those games better as a kid than what you are as an adult. But now as we're older and we understand game mechanics, a lot more, it would actually be a good, I guess, a good way to kind of relive your memories just to see if your video game skills have improved, to actually go back to the NES games and see if you can play them just plain vanilla without any help whatsoever. And I know as we're getting close to the end of the conversation, one genre of games we didn't really touch on that much is the shoot 'em up genre. And especially, the bullet hell shoot 'em ups. And, they're games that do take a lot of practice. Now, thankfully, a lot of the games do have unlimited continues, but they're definitely ones if you want to test your hand-eye coordination, your ability to dodge insane bullet patterns. And obviously, you can look towards the treasure classics, such as Ikaruga and Radiant Silvergun. Both you can get on the XBLA for a half-decent price. But one I can recommend because of its difficulty, and it is a lot like Super Meat Boy in the sense that you can die really fast, but then you can just continue and you can start back where you started. But it's a game in which you can die instantly, and that's the Bangai-O series. This is a series where you play as a mech, and and basically you shoot a lot of missiles. And the enemies shoot a lot of missiles. And some of the levels and some of the enemies that you have to fight is insane because, like, sometimes you can shoot as many as 100 missiles at the enemy, and then they can shoot just as many missiles back at you because a game that I played for the DS called Bangai-O Spirits, like, there were some levels in that game in which you would die within less than a second if you didn't know what to do. But even when you died, you didn't have to go through a lot of menus, to go back to that level again. You just say continue and you start right back where you started. And it just took, just a little bit of learning to actually learn the game mechanics. But sometimes it'll just throw you right into it and you don't know what you're doing. But it's an excellent example of a shoot 'em up game that is really difficult, but the more that you learn how to play it, the better you do get it. And I think it's a criminally underrated shoot 'em up series I don't hear a lot of people talk about. So if you want to play a shoot 'em up game series that can really test your patience with how difficult it is, I highly recommend the Bangai-O games. There's 3 of them you can get, two physically, 1 online. You can get Bangai-O for the Dreamcast, but unfortunately it's a very expensive, very high demand game. You can also get Bangai-O Spirits for the Nintendo DS. That's a little more on the cheaper side. And you can actually go on the XBLA and play a game called Bangai-O HD Missile Fury. And those are shoot 'em up games I can definitely recommend. If you want a real challenge with regards to the shoot 'em up genre. But the biggest thing is that as a kid, if you ever had a hard time beating specific NES games, I highly recommend you go back and play them and see how much further you can actually get through them as an adult without using any codes or like any cheat.
Yeah, I'd recommend that as well. There's a few games like Monster Party that I did that with as a kid. I only got to, a few levels in. As an adult, I beat it with somebody else, but it was fun, and you just have a different perspective on it. The games may just be a bit less twitchy than you remember, and maybe a bit more. You have to think a bit more than you thought as a kid. So I would recommend that as well. All good recommendations from all you guys. So I'd like to thank Derrick and Dinky for joining me on this. Their channels will be in the description if you want to check them out. I know this has been like 2 years in the making, maybe even 3 that we originally were trying to make this happen. So it's really great to finally talk to you guys, and maybe in another 3 years we'll find time to do another talk.
Yeah, sounds good. Definitely been fun. Glad we finally all got together. I know we've been trying to schedule it, and we had a good topic for it. So definitely something relevant to both Derrick and me.
Yeah.
Just the drawback of everybody being an adult these days. Free time is a luxury a lot of us can't really afford. But after all the time we've been planning this, especially to make it happen. It's finally good that way.
Yeah, it was a good time. So
cool. Yeah, thanks for having us on.
Yeah, thanks for listening. Those of you that actually got this far, this has been Silver Mongoose Videos, and remember, classic gaming never gets old.